carrying your coffins. voice has come from the Shaheen Bagh protesters that we are against Jinnah Wali Azadi? Has anyone has said that we are not for segregating Assam from India?
Okay.
No,
Charan Singh
no.
Sapra, you'd respond to that?
Yeah, see, the BJP leaders, like I earlier said, each one of them has to, perform that how rough or how foolish they can speak. They are probably rebel rouser or the hate mongers nowadays. And the way Anant Kumar dragging the country towards polarization, that is the only plank on which BJP wants to contest each and every election. They did the same during Jharkhand election, and they know what the result is. The CAA and NRC was loudly propagated during the election speeches in Jharkhand, but nothing came out of it. Same is going to happen in Delhi also.
All right, Charan Singh Sapra, thanks for your point of view. And RP Singh as well, thanks for your time here on the broadcast. So that tug of war really continues as far as Shaheen Bagh is concerned. That report, all the reactions and much more up on our website as well. That's news18.com. With that, it's time for a quick break here. News continues in just a bit. To this conclusion that no one killed Pehlu Khan.
Article 370 is absolutely an internal matter of our country.
We go where the news is. News Epicenter. At these times on CNN News 18. Amidst the cacophony of screaming studio spokespersons, one man is about to change all that. A veteran of covering 6 general elections and every assembly election in India, he has brought all major stories to your living room for over 20 years. Now, Bhupendra Chaubey is coming to you live in your city. A show where you will be the only voice. Viewpoint through the eyes of India's citizens. Weekdays at 5:57 p.m.
We are here to take the right stand on CNN News 18.
If somebody is squatting on my territory and play a proxy war game, I'm going to swat this person out of my territory and claim my land back. Personal friends of mine who are Sindhis, who are Sardars, who are Marwadis, who live in Chennai, speak Tamil. So that is not the issue. The issue is, sir, your brand of politics thrives on creating this language divide. Why are Hindus from Sindh fleeing Pakistan?
The Right Stand on CNN News 18. News is about stories, not about shouting matches or talking heads. We're putting the news back where it belongs. No debates, no bias, just the news. Helping you cut through the clutter. Brass Tacks, weeknights at 9:25.
A trucker fined 1,40,000 rupees.
We are not interested to increase the revenue of the government. We want to protect the life of the people.
Why to have this kind of a media trial?
Don't blame the media for everything. We are just reporting a story. Why didn't the public prosecutor push for this evidence which went viral, coming to this conclusion that no one killed Pehlu Khan?
Article 370 is absolutely an internal matter of our country.
We go where the news is. News Epicenter. At these times on CNN News 18. Amidst the cacophony of screaming studio spokespersons, one man is about to change all that. A veteran of covering 6 general elections and every assembly election in India. He has brought all major stories to your living room for over 20 years. Now, Bhupendra Chaubey is coming to you live in your city. A show where you will be the only voice. Viewpoint through the eyes of India's citizens. Weekdays at 5:57 p.m.
We are here to take the right stand on CNN News 18.
If somebody is squatting on my territory and play a proxy war game, I'm going to swat this person out of my territory and claim my land back. Personal friends of mine who are Sindhis, who are Sardars, who are Marwadis, who live in Chennai, speak Tamil. So that is not the issue. The issue is, sir, your brand of politics thrives on creating this language divide. Why are Hindus from Sindh fleeing Pakistan?
The Right Stand on CNN News 18. News is about stories, not about shouting matches or talking heads. We're putting the news back where it belongs. No debates, no bias.
Welcome back. Getting you more details of the Nirbhaya case and the case which is on in Supreme Court now, 7 years on. Nirbhaya's fight for justice continues as the convicts in the 2012 Delhi gang rape and brutal murder case are yet to be hanged. President Ramnath Kovind has rejected the mercy petition filed by Akshay Thakur, a third of the 4 convicts in this case. This comes after the president rejected the mercy pleas of Mukesh Singh and Vinay Sharma. The 4th convict, Pawan Gupta, is yet to file for clemency. Meanwhile, the Delhi High Court has given the convicts 1 week to finish exploring all the legal options for them, after which the trial court is going to begin the proceedings for their execution. The Apex Court, meanwhile, is going to hear the central government's plea tomorrow. This also is a plea by the Delhi government from the LG's side, challenging the High Court order that yesterday upheld the trial court order, refusing to hang the convicts separately. This was the petition that was pending before the High Court, which the High Court then dismissed yesterday, after which the centre moved the Supreme Court.
हाई कोर्ट ने जो फैसला दिया, मैं उस फैसले का स्वागत करती हूँ, क्योंकि यही दिक्कत थी कि उनको कोई समय बाउंड नहीं हो रहा था। वो आगे कभी इधर कभी उधर भाग रहे थे। जो भी समय मिलता था वो अलग अलग उसको टाइम को पास कर देते थे। तो अच्छा है कि समय बाउंड हो गया।
भारत सरकार की एप्लीकेशन और दिल्ली सरकार ने जो दोनों ने मिलकर लगाई थी, उस एप्लीकेशन को डिसमिस कर दिया गया है और साथ में हमारे लिए कहा है कि जो भी हमारी लीगल रेमेडीज हैं हम उन्हें अवेल करें और विद इन ए वीक 1 हफ्ते का टाइम दिया गया है कि उसमें हम अपनी लीगल रेमेडीज को आगे अवेल करें। जो विनय की दया याचिका देश के महामहिम राष्ट्रपति महोदय ने डिसमिस की है, उसके लिए हमने डॉक्यूमेंट मांगे हैं आरटीआई के माध्यम से, क्योंकि उन्होंने बिजली की गति से दिल्ली सरकार ने भेजी अपने चुनाव की राजनीति को संभालने के लिए, बिजली की गति से राष्ट्रपति महोदय ने भी वो डिसमिस कर दी।
Utkarsh Anand is getting us more details on that, and that matter is going to come up in Supreme Court tomorrow. Just take us through more details of the plea that is pending before the Apex Court. Utkarsh?
Well, Sneha, this is a challenge against the Delhi High Court order yesterday. Now, a day ago, the High Court said that all the 4 convicts in the Nirbhaya case, they need to hang together. They were held guilty by way of a common order. The death warrant was also issued on the same date. So the execution must also take place simultaneously. That is what the Delhi High Court said. So against that, the central government is here before the Supreme Court, now making a contention that under the prison rules, what has been mentioned is only about the applications and appeals. There is no fact mentioned that the hanging cannot take place separately when a mercy plea is pending or after a mercy plea is rejected. So because the word mercy plea has not been mentioned in the rules, there is nothing which impedes the prison authorities from carrying out execution of those who have exhausted all their legal remedies, and as well as their mercy plea that has also been rejected by the president. So notably, out of the 4 convicts in the Nirbhaya case, 3 convicts have availed all their legal remedies up till their curative petition has been dismissed by the Supreme Court, and their mercy plea also stands rejected by the president until this time as we are speaking. So the central government is saying that give us the permission to segregate their cases and execute 3 out of the 4 who have exhausted all their legal and constitutional remedies. Now this is the plea, this is what the central government is pressing before the court. Now a special bench which has been hearing the Nirbhaya matter, which is headed by Justice R. Bhanumati, is going to take up this case tomorrow sometime.
All right.
Yeah.
Be with us, Utkarsh. In fact, there is a reaction also of Union Minister Prakash Javadekar, who's blamed the Delhi government for delaying justice. Remember, this tu-tu-me-me has been going on between the BJP at the center and the Aam Aadmi Party government in Delhi as to who really is responsible for the delay in the execution. Listen in.
2.5 साल दिल्ली सरकार ने जो दोषी है उनको नोटिस भी नहीं दिया, जो उनकी जिम्मेवारी है, और उसके कारण उनके अपील और बाकी प्रक्रिया शुरू नहीं हुई। अगर जैसे ही सुप्रीम कोर्ट का निर्णय आता और दूसरे दिन अगर ये बताते दोषियों को, तो आज तक दोषी कब के फांसी लटक चुके होते। लेकिन आज अगर निर्भया के दोषी जिंदा है और फांसी पर नहीं लटके हैं, तो इसके लिए केवल और केवल केजरीवाल सरकार है जिम्मेवार।
आजादी आजादी के नारे लगाते हैं, ये क्या कहना चाहते हैं? क्योंकि देश तो हमारा 15 अगस्त 1947 को आजाद हो गया था और उसके लिए हमने बहुत मेहनत की थी। हमारे पूर्वजों ने, हमारे नेताओं ने बहुत बलिदान दिया, बहुत काम किया, बहुत खून बहाया, तब जाकर हमको आजादी मिली। सिर्फ नारे लगाने से नहीं लेगी, तो उसके लिए बहुत कुछ किया था। तो अब जो ये नारे लग रहे हैं, और मैं और से फर्क समझता हूं, तो अब ये जो बोलते हैं हम क्या चाहते आजादी, अरे मनुवाद से आजादी, अरे भूखमरी से आजादी, अरे पूंजीपति से आजादी, अरे जाति पाति से आजादी, अरे वामपंथी नहीं, वामपंथी तो आजादी मांग रहे हैं, सॉरी गलती हो गई। तो भाई अगर आपको ये ऐसी आजादी चाहिए, तो इस आजादी को पाने के लिए आपको काम करना पड़ेगा। आपको भूखमरी से आजादी चाहिए, तो आप उसके लिए काम करिए ताकि भूखमरी देश की हटे और लोगों को काम मिले। अगर आपको जाति पाति से आजादी चाहिए, तो उसके लिए काम करिए। बहुत सारे लोगों ने काम किया था, लोगों में फैलाए, ऐश मतलब पता लगे लोगों को। आप चाहते हैं कि नारे लगाने से सब कुछ हो जाए? नारे लगाने से क्यों होगा भाई? हर चीज को अगर आदमी यहीं घर बैठ के, आपको खाना तो नहीं मिलता ना, ये बोल के कि मैं क्या चाहता हूं पिताजी, आजादी, अरे पराठे से आजादी, अरे मुझको चाहिए इससे आजादी, मुझको चाहिए बिरयानी से आजादी। ऐसे नहीं होगा, ऐसे नहीं हो सकता है। उसके लिए आपको करना पड़ेगा। देश में जो 1947 से लेकर आज 2020 तक जो देश आया, उसके लिए लोगों ने काम, आप भी काम करिए। ऐसे बैठकर 25-25 साल एक संस्थान में बैठकर आप चाहते हैं कि आजादी मिल जाए, ऐसा नहीं हो सकता है। मैं आपको इसका एग्जाम्पल देना चाहता हूं। चलो ठीक है, मैं बताता हूं। देखिए, हालांकि मैं मजाक उड़ा रहा हूं, आप इसको देखो क्या कहते हैं, इसको टकला कहते हैं या इसको गंजा कहते हैं। मेरे बालों से मेरे सिर को आजादी है, लेकिन मैं नारे लगाना शुरू करूं, मैं क्या चाहता हूं आजादी, छोटी कंघी से आजादी, बड़ी कंघी से आजादी, हेयर ब्रश से आजादी, लंबे बालों से आजादी, छोटे बालों से आजादी, घुंघराले बालों से आजादी। तो भाई मैं बेवकूफ लगूंगा ना, क्योंकि मेरे पास तो आजादी ऑलरेडी है। अब किस चीज की आजादी मांग रहा हूं मैं, है ना? एग्जाम्पल मैंने दिया ना आपको। तो आपको अगर आजादी चाहिए तो उसके लिए काम करिए। तो ये शेयर करिए, सेंस ऑफ ह्यूमर इस्तेमाल। दोस्तों, मेरे को एक बात समझ में नहीं आती, नहीं इनफैक्ट समझ में आती है, लेकिन मैं डिस्कशन करना चाहता हूं ताकि थोड़ी क्लैरिटी।
All right, our executive editor Bhupendra Chaube is with us. Bhupen, it's a funny video that he's put out, but I think the message really is loud and clear. He is against protests that are on in Shaheen Bagh particularly, and also has been fairly vocal against the protesters in their position that they've taken against Citizenship Amendment Act, isn't it?
Well, Anupam Kher's political positioning has been known for, and it's as clear as daylight to which side of the political divide he's really at. What he's really effectuating here is that he's making the protesters feel a little ridiculed. He's explaining to them that this entire slogan of Azadi, Azadi is a slogan which is a ridiculous slogan, because if you need to have freedom from something, then you need to identify firstly what it is that you're protesting for. He's almost making it look like as if these protests are meaningless protests. These protests are happening just for the sake of protesting, and if anything, perhaps just as some kind of a fad. Now, there are many who believe that this positioning which is being taken by Anupam Kher is a positioning which has a lot of public support as well. For instance, in Shaheen Bagh or Jamia, the kind of traffic jams which these protests have led to, many people have been saying that we want freedom and we want azadi from these traffic jams. Then who's going to help them out? So Anupam Kher is effectively, he's using his artistic or his creative tool to try and send a very direct message to all these protesters.
He's been taken on in the past as well by many who in fact have criticized him for speaking in favor of the government, which he does, and I don't think he minces his words really, doesn't he?
We remember, Sneha, we remember when Nasiruddin Shah had called him as a clown a few days back, and Anupam Kher hit back at Nasiruddin Shah in his own way, where he had said that Nasiruddin Shah's description of him as a clown is nothing else but a tribute. Anupam is known to have taken these very strident positions, which to his critics may appear to be pro-Modi or pro-establishment positions. But having known of Anupam Kher personally, I can tell you that these are positions that he's completely convinced about. So he's using his own azadi to express his own self in the best possible way that he can.
That's right. And given the fact that this is a big talking point in these elections, the campaigning for which exactly, Bhupen, ends in about 5.5 hours from now, the BJP continues to, in fact, take the protesters on and also take Congress and Aam Aadmi Party on, saying that these are the ones supporting the protesters at Shaheen Bagh.
Yes, as we literally move towards the climax of the Delhi Assembly election campaign, what now remains to be seen is that what will happen post the 11th. The voting takes place on the 8th. The campaign effectively concludes today. But once the counting has concluded on the 11th, will these protesters leave? And if these protesters leave, if indeed Shaheen Bagh then ceases to be the protest ground that it has been, the protest epicenter across the country, so to say, who will really be held accountable for that? Will it be the establishment? Will it be the Aam Aadmi Party? I think in many ways, Anupam Kher's tweet will also lead us to those questions. Because look at the way he's describing his own tryst, for instance, with baldness. And he's saying that should I start talking about that I want azadi from Kangi and I want azadi from Tel, and therefore I want to be bald, I mean, that will make me feel very ridiculous. So what is he trying to say? He's trying to say that these protesters, if tomorrow, say post 11th, if they decide to end up taking a different position, how will the country look at these protests? Will it be a pure political tool? It just be that these were mere political pawns, the hands of larger vested political interests? I think in many ways, Anupam Kher's video message today points us to those questions too.
All right, Bhupen, be with us. In fact, we're playing out that video again that Anupam Kher has put out. In fact, he put this out via Twitter also. Let's take a look.
मैं डिस्कशन करना चाहता हूं ताकि थोड़ी क्लैरिटी हो जाए। तो ये जो लोग आजादी आजादी के नारे लगाते हैं, ये क्या कहना चाहते हैं? क्योंकि देश तो हमारा 15 अगस्त 1947 को आजाद हो गया था और उसके लिए हमने बहुत मेहनत की थी। हमारे पूर्वजों ने, हमारे नेताओं ने बहुत बलिदान दिया, बहुत काम किया, बहुत खून बहाया, तब जाकर हमको आजादी मिली। सिर्फ नारे लगाने से नहीं लगी थी, उसके लिए बहुत कुछ किया था। तो अब जो ये नारे लग रहे हैं, और मैं मे और से फर्क समझता हूं, तो अब ये जो बोलते हैं हम क्या चाहते आजादी, अरे मनुवाद से आजादी, अरे भूखमरी से आजादी, अरे पूंजीपति से आजादी, अरे जाति पाति से आजादी, अरे वामपंथी, नहीं वामपंथी तो आजादी मांग रहे हैं, सॉरी गलती हो गई। तो भाई अगर आपको ये ऐसी आजादी चाहिए तो इस आजादी को पाने के लिए आपको काम।
Hey, selamat datang di tempat gue, kopimandalan.com. Tempat ini bukan sekedar online coffee shop biasa. Di sini, gue yang buat aturannya. Ini semua bisa terwujud karena gue punya .com sebagai rumah gue. Website.com gue selalu online 24 jam, 7 hari 7 malam. Lihat nih klien gue, dari Jakarta sampai Jamaika, semua ada. Gue selalu catch up dengan email resmi dari .com. Website.com gue jadi tempat terbaik buat ngembangin bisnis. Siap nge.com, let's go!
no vindication, and that Republicans were complicit in a cover-up. Sky's senior correspondent Ian Woods reports.
Senators, how say you? Is the respondent, Donald John Trump, guilty or not guilty?
A question which Congress has wrestled with for 2 months. The impeachment drama had reached its final act, but the ending had long been predicted.
Mr. Casey, guilty. Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cassidy, not guilty.
2/3 of senators needed to vote to convict the president of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, but they failed to get even a simple majority.
It is therefore ordered and adjudged that the said Donald John Trump be, and he is hereby, acquitted of the charges in said articles.
But there was one notable dissenter from the president's party, the man who was his predecessor as the Republican nominee.
The president's purpose was personal and political. Accordingly, the president is guilty of an appalling abuse of public trust. Corrupting an election to keep oneself in office is perhaps the most abusive and destructive violation of one's oath of office that I can imagine.
A handful of Democrats from Republican-leaning states voted to convict, even though it could cost them re-election.
The Senate, sitting as a court of impeachment, stands adjourned sine die.
But Mitt Romney was the only juror to break ranks from his party.
I'm very impressed by Senator Romney's statement. Now the president has been bipartisan vote against his staying in office.
Within hours, the White House took revenge.
Slick, slippery, stealthy. Mitt Romney had us fooled.
Mr. Trump tweeted the video, but said he'd provide a full response to what he called our country's victory later today. He still calls impeachment a hoax and still denies pressuring Ukraine's president to investigate his Democratic rival Joe Biden for corruption.
The Democrats keep trying to run down this president because they know they can't run against this president. I think they tried to impeach this president because they know they can't defeat President Donald Trump in November of 2020.
For Democrats, convicting the president was always going to be a long shot, but the tactic may have backfired. Mr. Trump is still in the White House, and it's now up to the voters if he should be evicted. Ian Woods, Sky News, Washington.
The coronavirus has now claimed more than 550 lives in mainland China. That's after another 73 people died yesterday in Hubei province, the epicenter of the epidemic. It's the highest daily increase of the outbreak so far. And now the World Health Organization has issued a global appeal for £520 million in donations to help develop a 3-month preparedness and response plan. Sky's Asia correspondent Tom Cheshire reports.
This virus outbreak has turned cities into ghost towns. Now, there are ghost ships. The stairways of this cruise liner, docked outside Hong Kong, are deserted. 3 people who left the ship 2 weeks ago have since been diagnosed with novel coronavirus. Others on board are showing potential symptoms. So 1,800 people are now in quarantine, a floating isolation unit.
At the time being, I think we cannot conclude the likely time of finishing the quarantine measures right now. And I would like to reassure all the press or Hong Kong people here, our Department of Health is adopting a prudent approach in managing this incident.
In Japan, an even bigger cruise ship is in the same situation. 20 of those on board have been diagnosed with the virus. They will be disembarked and transferred to hospital. The other 3,700 people have a 2-week quarantine in their cabins. The seas are a long way from the center of this outbreak, in China's Hubei province. 8,000 medical workers have now been dispatched from around the country to help an overwhelmed health service. Along with the double-time construction of brand new hospitals, they hope to ease the load and slow the virus. The World Health Organization is worried about other countries' defenses. It says $675 million, around £520 million, is needed to get them ready.
I think at the moment we have something like 27 countries that are at high risk of importing the virus or already have imported it that need direct assistance very quickly. We have over 50 countries that already either have a high risk of importation or have a need for either direct operational assistance or technical assistance from us. That's a big challenge.
People in China have been staying away from major cities or inside at home. But they're starting to come back. And so authorities are getting ready, sterilizing the streets while they're still empty. Anything to slow the ever-growing spread of this virus. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Beijing.
Well, let's head to Beijing, where we'll find our Asia correspondent, Tom Cheshire. A slightly different backdrop, because, Tom, I'm hearing in my ear that you yourself are self-quarantined because of the trip you took up to Wuhan. Tell us a little bit about that, and actually, and in addition, the measures the government there are taking to contain the outbreak.
Yeah, so we went to Wuhan about 2 weeks ago, and the reason here at home rather than in the studio is when we tried to go to the studio, the management there said they knew about our trip to Wuhan, and we couldn't go in until the self-quarantine period was over. So we're here sort of making do. But these sorts of restrictive measures are happening all across China, even more restrictive measures, in fact. A number of cities far away from the outbreak have said that each family, each household can nominate only one person, and that person can go out every 2 days to get supplies. For the rest of the time, they've simply got to stay inside. It's a sign of how seriously authorities are taking this everywhere. And other signs as well about how much of a disruption this is going to be. Reuters has been reporting that the 2 sessions, this is the big annual parliamentary gathering, a sort of rubber stamp process for new laws. It is a really big event in China. Reuters reporting that that may be delayed, which is a huge, huge move. Everything, usually every year, nothing stops that happening. The whole country goes on lockdown. So for that to be delayed is a big move. China's government has also been cutting tariffs on US imports. And you think, for the last year, we were talking about the trade war and how important that was. That is now very much a sideshow to the fight against this virus. And that fight is continuous. We've had our deadliest day yet. I've said that a number of times. 73 people confirmed dead overnight. Again, worrying. What is good is that there was a lower number of new cases overnight. Yes, it's too early to say whether that might indicate we're reaching a peak. There are all sorts of different models about when this virus will start to tail off. I mean, you can look towards the advent of summer. I mean, that because this is part of the flu family, that's when viruses tend to tail off anyway, because they don't survive as well in heat and humidity. This right now is the perfect season. So people perhaps hoping that it is going to come to an end. And then on top of all that, in Wuhan, in Hubei, you've still got British nationals trapped, more than 100 still there wanting to get out. The Foreign Office has said there will be a second flight out, final flight out for anyone who wants to get out. And they're encouraging people to get in touch with them and book a place on that plane and get out of Wuhan. But where we are right now, China's still locking down even further. As other countries have said, leave China if you can. The fight against this outbreak keeps going, and it's being fought fiercely.
Tom, many thanks. An actor from the golden age of movies who lived well into his golden years. Just one of the many tributes being paid to the American actor Kirk Douglas, who's died at the age of 103. He was, of course, best known for roles in films like Spartacus and Ace in the Hole, and secured 3 Oscar nominations for Best Actor. Sky's US correspondent Greg Milam reflects now on his life and his career.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
One of the most famous movie scenes of all time, at its centre, one of the greatest stars Hollywood's ever produced.
You second, Ringo.
Kirk Douglas was one of the last links to the golden age of film, with the dimpled chin and tough guy persona.
Anybody else want to try their luck?
He starred in nearly 100 movies over 6 decades, his breakthrough coming in the film Champion.
Did you hear that crowd? See, for the first time in my life, people cheering for me.
There was Mermaid Minnie. And among the starring roles, one of Disney's early live-action films, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
One evening, her flame of love blew out.
His career brought 3 Oscar nominations before finally a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Academy when he was recovering from a stroke.
I see my 4 sons. They are proud of the old man.
It was one of those sons, the actor Michael Douglas, who confirmed his death, writing, "To the world he was a legend, an actor from the golden age of movies who lived well into his golden years, a humanitarian whose commitment to justice and the causes he believed in set a standard for all of us to aspire to. But to me and my brothers, he was simply Dad. It was his escape from a fatal air crash in his 70s that prompted Kirk Douglas to reassess his life.
2 young people were killed. Why am I alive? You know, it makes you think about a lot of things. It gives you your priorities.
When he reached 100, his son and daughter-in-law, Catherine Zeta-Jones, were there to help celebrate. His death comes on the eve of the Oscars. As Hollywood prepares to honour the stars of today, it will mourn one of the greats of the past for what Michael Douglas described as a well-lived life and a legacy that will endure for decades. Greg Milam, Sky News, Los Angeles.
Sky News has learned the identity of the first terrorist prisoner due for release after the Streatham attack in South London. Mohammed Zahir Khan, who posted statements online supporting Islamic State and called for a year of fear, is scheduled to leave prison at the end of the month. We understand that the government is so concerned by his release that it's rushing through emergency sentencing legislation to stop it happening. Sky's Home Affairs correspondent Mark White reports.
This is terrorist Sudesh Aman passing a convenience store in Streatham on Sunday afternoon. This is just 10 minutes before he launched his knife attack on passers-by on Streatham High Road, and just a week after he'd been automatically released halfway through a prison term. Sky News can now reveal the next terror prisoner due for release is this man, Mohammed Zahir Khan. He was jailed for posting extremist messages, calling for a year of fear and saying there was nothing wrong with beheading enemies. The government is so concerned about his release on the 28th of this month, it plans to have its emergency legislation in force to stop it.
Our laws at the moment are designed to deal with criminals, and our prison service is designed to rehabilitate criminals back into society, and terrorists are dealt with under criminal statute. But many of these terrorists cannot be de-radicalised.
In all, close to 20 convicted terrorists are due for automatic release in the months ahead. Next month, Jamshed Javid could be free. A Manchester chemistry teacher, he tried to join ISIS in Syria. Mohammed Khilji shared beheading videos and encouraged terrorism. And Mohammed Ghani was jailed last year for possessing terrorist documents. We now know the government plans to introduce its emergency legislation next Tuesday, but it's cutting it fine. It will only have 2 weeks to get it through its parliamentary stages and into law before the next terror prisoner is due for automatic release on the 28th of February. With hundreds of other terror offenders already back on our streets in recent years, it's up to MI5 and the police to do their best to monitor them. The Met's commissioner praised the actions of the surveillance teams who followed Sudesh Aman.
They are conducting covert surveillance, so they are not, of course, providing a man-to-man marking, if I could put it that way. They are there covertly, and that is a deliberate thing.
There are more than 200 Islamist prisoners currently serving sentences. If the government gets its way, many will be staying there for a bit longer yet. Mark White, Sky News.
It's 6:15. Coming up next here on the Early Rundown, calls for Facebook not to blindfold itself from the threat encryption plans pose to young people.
That's coming up next on Sky News. Well, now for the story behind the headline. I'm Dermot Manahan, and I'm the new host of the Sky News Daily Podcast, bringing you news and in-depth analysis from our team of specialists. I'll be joined by our experts to delve into the stories that matter to you. Trusted news with no agenda. The Sky News Daily Podcast, wherever you get podcasts from.
Meet Becky. And meet Ellie. Sisters who both won World Championship medals in 2019. Both could medal at Tokyo. Talented siblings. Her worst trait.
I'm very, very organised, probably over the top, and Ellie's not as much.
I'd say I'm organised, but Becky's just like next level organised.
Sisters, friends and teammates they may be, but they are at stages of their career. Becky, at 28, has vast experience, having competed at 2 Olympic Games already.
It's in the back of your mind every day, like every time like if you wake up and you're tired or you're sore and you're just like, oh, I don't really want to today, it's like, well, where do you want to be in 7-8 months' time? And that's kind of like what keeps me pushing, what keeps me motivated, what keeps me working. There's going to be days when it's like really hard. There are days still when it's really hard, but hopefully it'll be worth it to kind of get that end result.
Ellie, 8 years younger than Becky, competed at Rio as a 16-year-old.
The first time round I was probably less nervous and anxious because I'd never made it before. So this time I'm obviously wanting to make the team and do a lot better than I did. I've got a lot more competitions under my belt, more Worlds, more Euros, just more experience.
As with many aspiring Team GB Olympic athletes, to qualify nowadays is a challenge in itself. Both the women and the men have already done that for the team event. Who makes the team and the individual events is still up for grabs later this year, even for these 2 World Championship medalists. Geraint Hughes, Sky News, Nottingham.
Three people have died and at least 179 were taken to hospital after a Turkish airliner skidded off a runway and crashed at Istanbul airport. The Pegasus Airlines plane broke into 3 pieces following the incident, which left passengers scrambling through the split fuselage trying to escape. Sky's Ali Fortescue reports.
This was the moment a passenger plane careered off the end of a runway, breaking into 3 pieces. The aircraft stopped just short of a busy road. It was carrying 177 passengers from Izmir province to Istanbul. Turkish authorities say the majority of those on board survived.
Unfortunately, the Pegasus Airlines plane couldn't hold on to the runway due to poor weather conditions and skidded for around 60 metres. It fell from this area from around 40 metres height. 175 passengers, 2 babies, 4 flight attendants and 2 pilots were on board. 120 passengers were transferred to nearby hospitals.
This comes just a month after another Pegasus Airlines plane came off the runway at the same airport. Dozens of emergency workers were at the scene dousing the flames and evacuating passengers. The plane had had to land in heavy wind and rain. Those on board climbed through large cracks in its side to escape. Most of the passengers have been taken to hospital for treatment as Turkish authorities work to establish how another plane skidded off this busy runway. Ali Fortescue, Sky News.
Time for the other stories making the rundown this morning. And a search operation is continuing for people trapped under snow in Turkey after an avalanche killed 33 people during a rescue mission following an earlier avalanche. It takes the number of dead to 38 after both disasters struck a town near the border with Iran. Hundreds of emergency workers had been sent to the site to rescue 2 people missing after the first avalanche struck on Tuesday. A murder investigation is underway in Coventry after a teenager was stabbed to death. West Midlands police say a member of the public found a man collapsed off Pettitor Crescent in Woodend at around 7 p.m. last night. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The boss of Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg, has been told not to blindfold himself from the threat encryption could pose to young people. A letter sent by some of the world's biggest child protection organisations and backed by the Home Secretary warns that end-to-end encryption on Facebook Messenger and Instagram Direct risks giving offenders a place to hide, as the technology prevents police from reading messages. A record number of anti-Semitic hate incidents were reported to the Community Security Trust last year, according to research. The charity, which documents incidents and offers support to Jewish people, received 1,805 reports last year. That represents an increase of 7% on the year before. The Foreign Secretary is in Australia as part of a two-day visit to begin the process of locking down an early trade deal after Brexit. Speaking overnight, Dominic Raab's pledged to strengthen the two countries' economic ties as part of his plan for a more global Britain.
We've got a trade relationship already worth £17 billion, but we've got a potential to do so much more. That's why we've recommitted today to launching negotiations on an ambitious free trade agreement between our countries as soon as possible. Australia, we hope, will be part of that first wave of high-priority deals that we're pursuing.
Time for the sport now. And Tottenham beat Southampton in a 5-goal thriller to reach the FA Cup fifth round. As you've just seen, Heung-min Son, just about to see, Heung-min Son won a penalty, then scored it. The Spurs came from behind to win 3-2. The winner coming in the 87th minute.
Onwards, but still this morning it is murky out there, visibility below 100 metres in a few parts of... And it's frosty too, -4 in some spots this morning, so needing a little bit of extra time, of course, scraping windscreens once again. So foggy, frosty start because we've got that calm weather with us, and then gradually through the day the fog will lift, maybe persisting in parts of Wiltshire. Otherwise, it should clear from most places, and then it's a fine, dry day with sunny spells, temperatures up to about 8 or 9 degrees, a bit breezier in the west. And then as we head through this evening and tonight, we'll still clear enough in some parts of East Wales, North East England, eastern Scotland for some fog and some frost, but a little more limited than recent nights. And then as we head through Friday, it does look as though that'll clear pretty smartly because the breeze will be picking up, and it'll be an east-west split. Eastern parts tomorrow, breezy but sunny. Out to the west, clouding over with some rain heading in. Not a lot, but this is the first in a series of fronts. It doesn't bring a lot of rain, but it does eventually bring some wet weather to Ireland tomorrow. Then that will push away eastwards during Saturday morning. So Murrayfield, in fact, much of eastern Britain, having a bright and breezy Saturday. Out to the west, though, it'll become increasingly windy. Strong winds extending up through Ireland into western Scotland. This frontal system starting to come in later to bring some wetter weather. But it's as that clears through during Saturday night and Sunday when we start to see this low here, Storm Ciara, heading in and really bringing much stronger winds right across the country. I mean, the winds could well easily top 70, maybe 80 miles an hour in exposed areas. There'll be wet weather. There'll be increasingly wintry weather following this system as well, with snow mainly over the hills, some hail as well. I mean, this is Monday's picture. I mean, it's hard to imagine, really, considering how calm it is at the moment. A much more marked wind chill, some pretty nasty weather heading in.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
6:26 is the time. Coming up next here on the Early Rundown, totally vindicated. The words of President Donald Trump after he was acquitted in his impeachment trial. We will be rounding up a historic night in the Senate after this. It's 6:30 exactly. This is the early rundown. Leading the news today, guess what? The acquittal of Donald Trump in that impeachment trial. The president declared the result as a victory for the country, while his re-election campaign said he had been totally vindicated. Well, last night, the Republican-controlled Senate voted to clear President Trump of charges of abuse of power and obstruction of justice. But Democrats say the votes were no vindication and that Republicans were complicit in a cover-up. Sky's senior correspondent Ian Woods reports.
Senators, how say you? Is the respondent, Donald John Trump, guilty or not guilty?
A question which Congress has wrestled with for 2 months. The impeachment drama had reached its final act, but the ending had long been predicted.
Mr. Casey, guilty. Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cassidy, not guilty.
2/3 of senators needed to vote to convict the president of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, but they failed to get even a simple majority.
It is therefore ordered and adjudged that the said Donald John Trump be, and he is hereby, acquitted of the charges in said articles.
But there was one notable dissenter from the president's party, the man who was his predecessor as the Republican nominee.
The president's purpose was personal and political. Accordingly, the president is guilty of an appalling abuse of public trust. Corrupting an election to keep oneself in office is perhaps the most abusive and destructive violation of one's oath of office that I can imagine.
A handful of Democrats from Republican-leaning states voted to convict, even though it could cost them re-election.
The Senate, sitting as a court of impeachment, stands adjourned sine die.
But Mitt Romney was the only juror to break ranks from his party.
Very impressed by Senator Romney's statement. Now the president has been a bipartisan vote against his staying in office.
Within hours, the White House took revenge.
Slick, slippery, stealthy. Mitt Romney had us fooled.
Mr. Trump tweeted the video, but said he'd provide a full response to what he called our country's victory later today. He still calls impeachment a hoax and still denies pressuring Ukraine's president to investigate his Democratic rival Joe Biden for corruption.
The Democrats keep trying to run down this president because they know they can't run against this president. I think they tried to impeach this president because they know they can't defeat President Donald Trump in November of 2020.
For Democrats, convicting the president was always going to be a long shot, but the tactic may have backfired. Mr. Trump is still in the White House, and it's now up to the voters if he should be evicted. Ian Woods, Sky News, Washington.
Some amazing research, this. A new study has found that signs of cancer can appear years, even decades before diagnosis. Researchers say their findings could open the door to much earlier detection. Let's discuss this with Sky's Noel Phillips, who's been following the story. Morning, Noel. I suppose this is fantastic news on the faces of it, because the treatment of so many forms of cancer is determined by, well, early detection.
Indeed, Neil, morning. So this study is one I think that's very important. It's a huge study, biggest of its kind. It involved more than 1,000 scientists in more than 37 countries. And I'm going to try and work my way through the study and try and get you to understand in basic terms. The study basically has found that genetic mutations or changes in our bodies which occur over our lifetime, which then fuels the growth of tumours, which then leads to cancer, can be detected years before the disease is discovered by doctors. Now, these researchers analysed the genomes of over 2,600 tumours, so we're talking prostate cancer, brain cancer, breast cancer, and just to be precise, these were 38 different cancers, so I gave you a list there, and what they were able to find was a timeline which determined the sort of changes during the process of how cancer is delivered. And with cancer causing 165,000 deaths every year, this points to the possibility that those at risk could be diagnosed much earlier, so their cancer could be spotted at a much earlier date than what we already know at the moment. And they're using what they describe as, it's a very technical term, carbon dating method. They're able to determine that ovarian cancer occurred earlier than expected in some people. So we're not expecting to see a change in cancer screening time at the moment, but I think this study is one which will attract the attention of experts here and across the world. It's been welcomed by the NHS. Their clinical director for cancer has said this morning, finding ways to turn research like this into tests we can use in the clinic could change when and how we diagnose cancer in the future. So, as you said, Neil, a very, very welcome study, which I think is the most detailed of its kind in years, which could potentially change the way in how cancer is treated in many years to come.
Thanks, Noel. A piece of ice the size of a block of flats has split from a glacier in Antarctica, near to where Sky News has been filming scientists tracking the impact of climate change. The huge slab, at least 40 metres high and weighing thousands of tonnes, toppled from the William Glacier on Anvers Island. Sky's science correspondent Thomas Moore was there.
You're watching the birth of an iceberg. From a mile away, there's a faint rumble as Antarctica's William Glacier first crumbles, then collapses, attacking thousands of tons, toppling into the fjord, then rolling with a torrent of water and ice falling off its sides. The vibrations trigger further ice falls, left and right, the camera barely able to keep up. While a crewmate filmed up on the bridge of our British Antarctic Survey ship, there was astonishment.
So as I say, you've got bits of it moving this way, the whole front then moved off to the right, and then it just started another cascade further and further and further down the glacier, at which point we were already turning round to make our way out into deeper water, because we just really weren't sure exactly how much more of it was going to collapse. But the whole face of the glacier, as you're looking at it now, is a completely different vista to what it was 2 days ago.
But a few hours later, we venture back in. The huge iceberg is grounded on the seabed. Offcuts are still splitting and spinning. The blue ice, hardened by the immense pressure of the glacier, is a serious hazard to our ship.
We're still around a kilometre from the ice front, but this is as far as the captain dares go, and with good reason. We can hear all around us the crackle of gunfire as the bergs in the water shatter, and up on the mountainside, the roar, the cannon fire as the glacier moves.
It's impossible to say how much ice has been lost, but 5 square miles of water are now covered in the debris. Air bubbles thousands of years old, popping like Rice Krispies as the ice melts. It's rare to see such significant carving, but over the last 20 years the glacier has retreated by almost a mile.
So the bit you're seeing above the surface, the 40-odd metres of vertical extent above, that's released, but then all the stuff below has also come up, and these icebergs aren't just the size of houses, they're the size of whole blocks of houses and blocks of flats, and yeah, it's not insignificant at all.
Antarctica has lost 3 trillion tons of ice over the last 25 years as the planet has warmed. Ice that's rapidly adding to sea levels around the world. Thomas Moore, Sky News, in Borgen Bay, Antarctica.
Time now for the media wrap, and let's start on the other side of the Atlantic today. The New York Times is leading on President Trump's impeachment acquittal by the Senate on those charges of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. All Democrat senators and just one Republican, Mitt Romney, voted to find the president guilty. The rest of the Republican-controlled Senate ensured that the president will finish his term in office. A country's victory, according to the president. Well, Donald Trump has been uncharacteristically quiet on social media about his acquittal. He'll be making a full statement later today. What he did do was post this, a mock-up of the front page of Time magazine, which asserts that Trumpism will outlast him when he eventually leaves office. And it's a moving picture as well. Let's take a quick look. 28, 32, 36, 40. Donald Trump thinks he's going to be around in 2048. Others might disagree. This music, of course, according to my director, is the Alton Towers music, or Edvard Grieg, Peer Gynt. And it just keeps on going. I'm not entirely certain what Donald Trump's message is here, given that the US president is only allowed to serve 2 terms in office. Trump forever. What a thought. Let's have a look at the cartoon in the Times, which shows a rather smug president ripping up those impeachment charges. A reference, of course, to Nancy Pelosi ripping up the State of the Union address behind him as he accepted applause from Republicans in the chamber. Let's head back to the United Kingdom, though. The Daily Telegraph says the government is set to announce a law which will require social media bosses to face prosecution if they breach their duty of care. Directors to be held personally liable for breaches under this new law. Anne Sakoulas, a name you'll remember, that's the American woman involved in the car crash that killed the teenager Harry Dunn. Well, she's featuring on the front of the Mail. She's been photographed getting into her car in Virginia 6 months after the crash. The Daily Mail tracked her down in Virginia following that crash. Harry's family say these pictures are sickening. Flutter nonsense. The Sun is reporting that MPs have blasted orders for town halls to fly the Union flag on Prince Andrew's birthday. The paper says critics of the planned celebrations have accused officials of putting stuffy history in front of public opinion, amid all that controversy regarding Prince Andrew's friendship with the convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. I wonder how this one will end up. The Express, meanwhile, leading on the announcement by the Culture Secretary, Nicky Morgan, that failing to pay the licence fee will be decriminalised. She said the BBC must move with the times to stay relevant and that TV licences could be scrapped in just 7 years. A range of views on this. Well, The Guardian's parliamentary sketch writer John Crace has criticised the Culture Secretary. Nicky Morgan now says the BBC must work in an open and accountable way, like taking a peerage and remaining Secretary of State for Culture. Baroness Nicky Morgan, we should say. And finally, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences has paid tribute to Kirk Douglas, who's died aged 103. In a tweet, they quote the Hollywood legend saying this: "I wanted to be an actor ever since I was a kid in the 2nd grade. I did a play and my mother made a black apron and I played a shoemaker. After the performance, my father gave me my first Oscar, an ice cream cone. Goodbye to a Hollywood legend." And that's your media wrap for today. It's 6:43, you're watching The Early Rundown. Still to come, I'll be speaking to a transport expert about Birmingham's plans to work toward a car-free future.
Hello, I'm Claire Bridge with your showbiz news. A warning, there's some flash photography coming up. Shannon Doherty, star of shows such as Beverly Hills 90210 and Charmed, has revealed her breast cancer has returned. Doherty was first diagnosed with cancer in 2015 but soon went into remission. However, the 48-year-old has told Good Morning America that the cancer returned a year ago, calling the diagnosis a bitter pill to swallow. Lizzo and rapper Dave will be performing at this year's Brit Awards. The pair have been added to the list of stars who will be on stage in London later this month. It's previously been announced that Lewis Capaldi, Harry Styles and Stormzy will be singing on the night. And Britain's Prince Charles has named American pop star Katy Perry as a new ambassador for one of his charities, the British Asian Trust, which helps tackle poverty, inequality and injustice. At an event in London, the singer spoke about how she's a big fan of the Prince of Wales and is promising to put on a performance for his plants.
I'm excited to be here because I'm a big fan of His Royal Highness.
and all the work that he's done and is continuing to do, especially in India for children. In my own personal experience, he has an incredibly kind soul. So kind that, yes, sometimes he talks to his plants, and he asked me if I could sing to his plants. And I will in the future. You have my word, sir.
Prince Charles said he was delighted to have Katie on board.
Given Katie's long-standing commitment to charitable causes around the world, I'm delighted to be announcing that she has most generously agreed to become an ambassador for the British Asian Trust's Children's Protection Fund for India.
Welcome back. Birmingham has announced plans for a car-free future. It's one of a series of ambitious plans that councillors say should make the city carbon neutral by 2030. But they're not the only city in the race to net zero. A number of places around the UK are now making ambitious plans for the future when it comes to transport. Officials in York, well, they think they might be first to get there. As one of the UK's most popular tourism destinations, traffic there is bad in spring and summer. So councillors have proposed banning vehicles from the city centre by 2023. But York faces competition from Brighton and Hove. Councillors there say the best way to improve air quality would be to ban cars within the next 3 years. And there are, of course, others. Oxford is to charge drivers of petrol and diesel cars £20 from 2024 to drive into the city. In Portsmouth, by around 2025, a 140-acre car-free community could be built at Tipner West. Cars would be banned and parked underground. And one of the most ambitious plans is, in fact, in Manchester. The mayor there, Andy Burnham, wants to increase walking by a third and quadruple cycling. No definite plans to ban cars, but it has certainly been suggested as a possibility within 5 years. These plans, well, they might seem radical to us, but to the Dutch, we are well behind the times. Rising numbers of deaths from road accidents there led to a change in attitudes. Money was spent on cycleways, car-free days were held, and in the city of Groningen, roads were blocked with rubble to people driving. There was a petition asking the Queen of Holland to intervene, and politicians resigned. Nearly 50 years later, Groningen is consistently rated as one of the world's best cities in which to live. And so, the latest British city to unveil its car-free plans, Birmingham, cars banned from crossing the city under radical plans set out this week. Sky's Becky Johnson has the story.
The Austin Motor Factory at Birmingham, already reaching new production levels.
The car industry sealed Birmingham's reputation as the workshop of the world.
At Tisley, where the famous engines are made.
During the 20th century, cars dominated the city's economy and then its landscape. Today, it's a city built with the motor car in mind. The famous Spaghetti Junction, a symbol of how many people's lives revolve around their cars.
Pedestrians became a secondary concern in the city centre, relegated to underpasses beneath increasingly congested roads. But change is coming, with plans for a city where the car is no longer king.
It'll be redesigned, less of this and more of this. There'll be clean air charges and, most controversially, a ban on driving through the city centre. There'll be restrictions near schools too. It sounds drastic, but is welcomed by people who are already trying to do their bit.
Children are dying from having asthma attacks. Elderly and frail people who already have health conditions. Air pollution is then contributing to untimely deaths. It's not something that any of us can be complacent about or just ignore.
But the Transport Secretary has warned the plans are extreme. Could kill the city centre if people stop travelling in. Taxi drivers share those fears.
And that's going to have a lot of effect on our business and Joe. Public as well, and the shops in the city centre who thrive on people coming into the city centre. centre, and that's how their day-to-day business runs. And if that's going to stop, the shop's not going to make money, and obviously the taxi trade is going to suffer as well.
This machine measures air pollution levels.
You can see that becomes 15,000, just because the car, particularly diesel cars.
In the future, this A road could be rerouted away from the city centre.
You cut the A38, then the cars have to go around, potentially travel for longer, having more pollution. And that, although you would improve the air quality in the city centre, that has a potential of deteriorate air quality in other places.
Birmingham isn't the only city making changes. The government is working with 60 other councils too. But cars are such a big part of this city's past and present. The future here will be very different. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Birmingham.
Well, joining us now from Bristol to discuss this further, Dr. Steve Melia, a senior lecturer in transport and planning at the University of the West of England. Steve, good to see you this morning. Let's just focus very specifically on the plans in Birmingham. The whole idea seems to be that if we are to get to net carbon zero, cars in city centres need to be banned. Just in terms of that assertion, is it correct?
I think we'll have to do an awful lot more than that. I think that's one useful step. Actually, ironically, I'm going to be in Birmingham this Saturday giving evidence to the Parliamentary Committee's Climate Assembly on that specific question. We now have a legal obligation to get to net zero. How are we going to do it? And, with the announcement that was made the other day that the government is considering banning petrol and diesel cars by 2035, there was a slight sort of caveat saying that maybe we'll do it a bit quicker if that's feasible. But most of the estimates that have been done on that have said that if that is the timescale, that will not be enough. So we're going to have to do an awful lot more to reduce the volume of traffic as well if we are to stay within the new carbon budgets and the Climate Change Act.
When you say that the time scale, the time available to us won't be enough, why might that be? Is it just the scale of the infrastructural changes that would be required?
Yeah, well, it's important to understand the way that climate legislation works is it's not just about the end point. It's about the total amount of carbon that you emit over time. And that's why you may sometimes hear the people on the committee talking about carbon budgets. So a budget is a total amount of carbon that you emit over each 5-year period. And if you emit more at the beginning, you've got to cut faster later on. So that's, it's a simple calculation that then leads to that conclusion.
Just in terms of how one would structure a city centre, the scale of Birmingham, without cars being able to kind of pass in and out. Look, I've spent a good bit of time in Birmingham over the years. The idea that Birmingham, the city centre, could be entirely car-free seems a little bit beyond the pale. So many people there are reliant on their cars rather than the public transport network.
Well, I think the way that these things are presented always make them sound more black and white than they really are. There's already a significant portion of Birmingham city centre that you can't drive through. The same is true for many other cities. So what is being proposed here is an incremental change on what is already there. It's not like a sort of a radical change that's going to make it completely different from how it is today. I mean, the answer, how do people get it, is that actually this is not about the city centres themselves. You know, people who are going to city centres drive, park somewhere, and then drive back out again. You know, we've done studies in the past that's looked at, for example, the where shoppers come from. You know, the idea that, I think Grant Shapps mentioned this, the idea that shoppers in a city centre are just driving by, sort of park, you know, pop out of the car to do something and then carry on is nonsense. The proportion of people who do that in city centres is tiny. So, I mean, this is more about the direction of through traffic. It's not about the city centre itself. It won't really change very much about access to the city centre.
Well, Steve, I'm presuming you're not taking the car up to Birmingham this week and instead getting on the rail. Well, have very safe travel anyway. Dr. Steve Melia, Senior Lecturer in Transport and Planning at the University of West of England. Thanks for being with us. Time now for the weather. Isabel's here.
Thanks very much, Neil. Well, interesting weather because it's all changed this weekend as Storm Kira comes in, bringing really nasty weather, very strong winds, large waves, coastal flooding, even some snow in the mix as well as we start to see some cold air pushing through. But honestly, for the moment, got high pressure in charge. It's a frosty and foggy morning, particularly across Wales and Northern Ireland, a few spots around about 100 metres still, and it does look as though that fog could linger in some areas, particularly I think for the West Country. There it'll be a cold day, that's for sure, but where the fog lifts you'll find that temperatures respond quite nicely with a fair amount of sunshine, up to about 8 or 9 degrees, feeling nice where you have the calm conditions in the east.
Point your attention towards, in terms of today's news agenda, Cabinet meeting at 8:15 this morning. Few of them might not be in post by the end of the week. And after being acquitted in his impeachment trial, Donald Trump will be making a statement at around about 5 p.m. UK time. Kay Burley up next. Kay Burley at breakfast. Sarah Hewson in the chair.
It's 7 o'clock. You're watching Kay Burley at Breakfast with me, Sarah Houston, live from the heart of Westminster. A green light for green transport. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, joins me in just a moment to talk about his plans to create an all-electric bus town. Plus, we'll look at whether Birmingham might ban cars from its city centre. Also on the show, as Donald Trump is acquitted in his impeachment trial, we'll speak to Washington insiders about whether the president is now set fair for re-election later this year. A child protection specialist on why he thinks that Facebook needs to do more to protect children. And I'll be joined by two members of our armed forces up for awards that honour British troops. But first, the top stories you're waking up to on Thursday, the 6th of February.
It is therefore ordered and adjudged that the said Donald John Trump be, and he is hereby, acquitted of the charges in said articles.
They can't beat him, so they had to impeach him. Donald Trump is cleared by the Senate in his impeachment trial and now sets his sights on re-election.
I'm Spartacus!
I'm Spartacus!
Leaving the stage, one of the last survivors of the golden age of movies. Tributes are paid to the American actor Kirk Douglas, who's died at the age of 103. The number of people killed by China's coronavirus surpasses 550 as the World Health Organization appeals for financial help to battle the outbreak. Horror on the runway. 3 people are now known to have died when a Turkish airliner crash-landed at Istanbul airport. The birth of an iceberg. Sky News sees firsthand how ice as big as blocks of flats are forming from an Antarctic glacier. In the weather, some fog patches in the south, sunny spells elsewhere. Good morning and welcome to Kay Burley at Breakfast with me, Sarah Houston. We start with President Donald Trump, who was last night comfortably acquitted by the Senate of obstructing Congress and abusing the power of the office of president. The verdict in Mr. Trump's favour came despite a vote against him by Mitt Romney, his predecessor as the Republican nominee. Mr. Romney accused Mr. Trump of an appalling abuse of public trust. Following the president's victory, the White House called for retribution against those Democrats behind the impeachment bid. Mr. Trump is expected to give a fuller response later on today. Here's our senior correspondent in Woods.
Senators, how say you? Is the respondent, Donald John Trump, guilty or not guilty?
A question which Congress has wrestled with for 2 months. The impeachment drama had reached an act, but the ending had long been predicted.
Guilty. Mr. Casey, guilty. Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cassidy, not guilty.
2/3 of senators needed to vote to convict the president of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress, but they failed to get even a simple majority.
It is therefore ordered and adjudged that the said Donald John Trump be, and he is hereby, acquitted of the charges in said articles.
But there was one notable dissenter from the president's party, the man who was his predecessor as the Republican nominee.
The president's purpose was personal and political. Accordingly, the president is guilty of an appalling abuse of public trust. Corrupting an election to keep oneself in office is perhaps the most abusive and destructive violation of one's oath of office that I can imagine.
A handful of Democrats from Republican-leaning states voted to convict, even though it could cost them re-election.
The Senate, sitting as a court of impeachment, stands adjourned sine die.
But Mitt Romney was the only juror to break ranks from his party.
Very impressed by Senator Romney's statement. Now the president has been bipartisan vote against his staying in office.
Within hours, the White House took revenge.
Slick, slippery, stealthy. Mitt Romney had us fooled.
Mr. Trump tweeted the video, but said he'd provide a full response to what he called our country's victory later today. He still calls impeachment a hoax and still denies pressuring Ukraine's president to investigate his Democratic rival Joe Biden for corruption.
The Democrats keep trying to run down this president because they know they can't run against this president. I think they tried to impeach this president because they know they can't defeat President Donald Trump in November of 2020.
For Democrats, convicting the president was always going to be a long shot, but the tactic may have backfired. Mr. Trump is still in the White House, and it's now up to the voters if he should be evicted. Ian Woods, Sky News, Washington.
The government will today set out plans to offer local areas a chance to bid for £50 million to become the first all-electric bus town. It is part of a larger £170 million fund to encourage more people to take the bus. The Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, is here with me. Good morning to you, Mr. Shapps. So, all-electric bus towns, and another announcement, one of the more eye-catching in your proposals, is on-demand Uber-style buses for rural areas, a trial for this. How would this work?
Yeah, well, so, I mean, first of all, it's amazing that people don't realise 50% of buses, 50% of journeys on public transport are taken on buses. So buses are already a very, very big part of the network. But wouldn't it be great if you could, you know, either use an app or push a button and get a bus to turn up as and when you needed it? And that's actually already experiments that are just getting going. We want to really kind of make that work a lot faster.
It sounds fantastic. But in practical terms, how does it work? You can't have buses sitting around in rural lay-bys somewhere waiting for someone to use them because
well, of course, in the longer,
it doesn't work,
well, of course, in the longer distance, you might be able to do that because of things like, you know, AI, so automation and ways of doing that. In the shorter term, actually, some of these experiments are already getting going. There's something called a Riva Click, which is already experimenting with doing exactly that. And what it might be is tell who wants a bus and when, and actually help to programme the route around it. So lots of different ways to make that happen, and that's why we're putting quite a bit of money today into, as you say, one of the more eye-catching
As you say, 50% of journeys on buses, you say, but actually far fewer bus journeys now than a decade ago. 320 million fewer bus journeys this year than 10 years ago. Funding for buses is £400 million less each year than it was when you first came to power. Bus routes have been cut, 3,000 bus routes have been cut, and that has led to social exclusion in the rural areas I was referring to there. Do you admit that those cuts were a mistake?
I mean, this is a new government, and we absolutely love buses.
It's still a Conservative government.
Yeah, but I was going to say, you know, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who is London Mayor, and London's the exception to all those figures you put out. We've massively got a very, very reliable bus service, and people who use it in an area where it's reliable. I mean, I think in different times when we were trying to rescue the country from going bust in the Great Recession, bus services were one of the things which suffered. We're very, very keen to reverse that round, and I want to see buses being as convenient.
Party people, you out here tonight to have a real good time. So we gonna have one of the craziest times you ever had in your life. We going into a brand new year. I need y'all to make some noise. I said, make some noise. That's what I'm talking about. Let's start the countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Are you ready?
kepercayaanmu adalah amanah yang akan kami jaga sepenuh hati. Meski kadang tidak mudah, tapi pasti ada jalan.
내가 보기엔 좀 달라 거침없어 so strong 잠깐만 치면은 찰나 뒤집어버려 bomb the bomb 순식간에 적 내 숨을 턱 막히게 해 말투는 cool 나의 몸짓은 hot like 우아하게 난 지금 won't stop can't stop 너를 노려 사랑 나도 결국엔 조금만 무인도 alright 끝났어 더 깊이 파고들어 끝까지 확실히 단단히 나를 우러러 써보겠지 나를 외치고 부르짖겠지 그래 아마 넌 내꺼지겠지 넌 전부 다 잊혔어 You're so dun 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 You're so dun 꼼짝 못할게
Hands up high, high, cause peace will never die. never die.
In the mix.
always throwing down for the whole squad. Never going back to my old job. Flying in a jet going off to Mars. Trying to see the world through different cars. The sweat and tears of different years. I knew I was made for this. Tonight I just take a sip. I guess this what famous is. I've been on my last. I've been down for the count. I've been climbing to the top. I've been all the way down. Just put your hands on my hands. Let's get out of this crowd. I wanna dance, my way out of this town. All I know, I've been on my last. I've been down for the count. I've been climbing to the top. I've been all the way down. Just put your hands on my hands. Let's get out of this crowd. I wanna dance,
When you touch me, lightning strikes. So won't you